Welcome to 17 days until the general strike against Congress. And tonight we're going to talk a little bit about what exactly that means. I'm not going to dig into the legislation tonight, although if people have questions, please drop them in the live stream and I will try and answer those and pull up the legislation and take a look at anything that people are interested in. But tonight we want to talk more about the philosophy, the reasons for establishing justice, how the general strike could work, new framework for government, those kind of things. But as we do every night, I want to start these things off with reciting the preamble to the Constitution. It's a way of reminding ourselves of America's mission statement. So you're invited to join me. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. Now, the way that we, the people, can get back to those five duties, the establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty. The way that we get back to those things is by demanding that Congress pass the blueprint for a better America. That is our crowdsourced legislative package that does those five things. So this week we've been talking about how we establish justice with major criminal justice reform, how we ensure domestic tranquility with creating a truce over wedge issues, the wedge issues of guns and abortion. We provide for the common defense by scaling back the military-industrial complex a little bit closer to what the framers had intended. How we provide for the general welfare, the health, happiness, and prosperity of citizens through universal basic income and other reforms. And then how we preserve the best blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity by cleaning up the planet, by implementing a carbon fee and a plastic fee to discourage the pollution that our posterity will inherit. So that's the basic overview of what the legislative package does. And it's all written down for Congress. This is, well, we'll talk about the general strike in a minute, but it's one of the things that makes the American Union model different than traditional politics. Right? If you've ever heard a campaign commercial, you've probably heard campaign promises, and they go, where they end with the candidate enthusiastically approving this message. And these advertisements, they clog our airwaves, the social media. We spend $16 billion in 2016, $16 billion on these advertisings. And candidates make these pledges, and those pledges basically fall into three different categories. The most basic of these is a pledge of non-cooperation. Republicans do this more often than Democrats, and their pledges like no new taxes or protect the Second Amendment, things where they tell us they will never ever support any changes to the status quo. That's a pledge of non-cooperation, and fighting to maintain the status quo is to conserve the status quo is where we get the description of conservative. And so there's sort of like a little bit of underlying negativity to these kinds of pledges of I'm going to protect the status quo, and if you like the other guy, unwelcome changes are going to take place. Now, the second kind of promise is a promise of cooperation. Now, independent voters, lots of voters like this idea of bipartisanship and cooperation. And in many swing districts, this is the kind of message that if you want to be a successful candidate, you need to make. For incumbents, they can usually find some piece of legislation, some bill or something that they co-sponsored with a member of the other party so that they can, it's their trophy bipartisan bill, and they can hold it up and say, see, look, the bipartisan things that I'm doing. But you got to be careful about doing the bipartisan thing, because then you might end up getting primaried by members of your own party who don't think you're pure enough. And then the other kind of promise that candidates sometimes make is to accomplish a specific goal, like affordable health care. Well, like, what does that mean exactly? Right? Part of the difficulty in accomplishing this is from the vague phrasing. But the main problem with making a specific goal and making a promise to accomplish it is the way that the legislative process works. Is that while you're running for Congress and you're making these very specific promises, there's 1,000 other candidates who are also running for Congress and also making promises. So then you get up to Congress with 534 other members, all have been elected with different ideas and campaign promises. And it's like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle drawn from 535 different boxes. They probably don't all fit together. And if you do get them to fit together, they don't necessarily match the original image that the candidates held up to the voter. And so this is a broken political model. We need a better way to make democracy work. And the way that the framers made it work was the way that they wrote the Constitution was they didn't put it up for public opinion until after the fact. They just met in the summer of 1787 and they hashed everything out. And there wasn't any specific details that were really available to the public. Now, if you could imagine that kind of thing happening today, we'd all get flooded with emails, asking people from different organizations, asking us to sign a petition against the Electoral College, or click here and tell Alexander Hamilton to oppose the 3/5 compromise, or send $25. We're going to put a billboard up in Philadelphia demanding the direct election of senators. Like, the process doesn't necessarily work when every little thing is subject to public scrutiny. And so, but what they did, the model they used, was to offer one specific set of solutions, the Constitution to the United States. And it was offered to the American people for a straight up or down vote. And with, the states ended up ultimately ratifying it. And it's still in force today. So part of the problem that we have is the bicameral structure of the way that Congress works. Now, the original intent was Congress was going to represent the people. Their goal was one representative for every 30,000. Now, we are far, far away from that model of one representative every 30,000. It's closer to like one representative for every 750,000 people. And so once again, the average citizen has very little impact on their representative. And this is doubly true for the US Senate, whereas we've got 330 some million Americans and 100 senators. And so the average senator is representing tens of millions of people. But you remember, the original intent of the Constitution was to have the US Senate represent the states. That's why each state got two. That's why senators were elected by the state legislatures to represent their interests. And so that was supposed to be the balance there of states' interest and the people's interests, and forcing them to work together. But with the adoption of the 17th Amendment and the direct election of senators, we get to directly elect all of our representatives. And so you have to ask the question of, what is the purpose of a bicameral legislature anymore? And the answer is that it's generally there for gridlock. And this is so much of what we see in Congress today, where one chamber passes something and the other chamber passes something different, and then maybe nothing happens, or maybe one chamber never passed it. Sort of in the way that you see the House pass a lot of policy that then the Senate it goes there and dies. And so the better way is the model that Nebraska uses, which is a unicameral legislature, so that you know exactly who is responsible for the passage or the failure to pass pieces of legislation. And you can, because again, think about how this works in practice, right? Where the House says, oh, well, we passed these things and the Senate didn't do it, but it's not our fault because we passed it. Or sometimes if the Senate passes something like the bill to end or to keep us on permanent daylight saving time, right? That the Senate has passed this, the House has not. And so this happens in other scenarios too, where chambers pass different versions of the bill. And if they can't agree on something, the bill dies, but yet both chambers, politicians from both sides, all get plausible deniability and say, oh, well, we passed it. Sorry, it didn't actually become law, but I voted for it. And so a unicameral legislature simplifies this because it's very clear whether or not the chamber acted, whether or not the legislative body passed the legislation. There's no one else to blame it on. And so this model of offering one legislative package to all the members of Congress and all their opponents in the 2022 midterms uses that same model. So there's no question over passing different versions of a bill. There's no questions over who voted for it or against it, or any you have the opportunity to give all of them the same up or down choice. And so that's one of the ways that the American Union model cuts through the gridlock of Congress, by putting the partisan squabbles aside and instead offering one package of legislative solutions from the American people. And we've seen Congress do this on many occasions. One of the biggest occasions was in December of 2020, when the House and the Senate had both passed different versions of a completely, a benign bill. And when that happens, it goes to a committee of conference, and then the leadership from the House and the leadership from the Senate decide who gets to sit on that committee of conference. So this takes power away from the the regular members of Congress and gives excessive power to the leadership. And leadership was then able to hash out a deal. And that deal was a 5,593 page amendment to HR 311. And it had nothing to do with the original bill, but it was a way of replacing the text in the committee of conference. And then when the bill came out of committee of conference, it went straight to the House and to the Senate for an up or a down vote. No opportunity to offer amendments, take it or leave it. And so as long as we have this bicameral legislative structure, as long as we have this congressional gridlock, we can use that same mechanism to demand that Congress take the text of a bill in committee conference and substitute the blueprint for a better America and give it to the House and the Senate for an up or down vote, and put it on the president's desk within 10 days of the general strike. This is another important aspect, is to show that this is not direct democracy. This is not citizen initiative legislation solely from the citizens going right to the president's desk. As the framers intended, all the branches have checks and balances. And so setting up a People's Congress as essentially a fourth branch of Congress that can serve as a check on elections to the legislative and executive branch, but also as one that can propose legislation directly to all the members of Congress. They still have to approve. They still would have to vote up any proposed legislation. And so this ties back into the motives, the goals, the reason for doing for the goals of the legislative package. So basing them in the Constitution, and and our constitutional duties. What are we trying to accomplish? What do we want to do? And so by establishing a strong moral framework for our goals as Americans, it gives Congress the power to approve or disapprove. So, for example, if a People's Congress said, we want to, I don't know, build a circus in every town over 5,000 people and hand out free bread to everyone who wants it. Congress has the ability to act as a check on those demands, and so that the people cannot directly vote to give themselves bread and circuses. Congress is dropping the ball. Congress has forgotten what our 5 duties are. Congress is failing to establish justice and ensure domestic tranquility and provide for the common defense and promote the general welfare and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. And we need a better model for it. So the answer isn't to put our faith in trying to elect just the right, to elect the right people who will go into Washington and clean it up, but instead put faith in the American people, that we can come up with solutions and we can leverage our votes to force Congress to act. If the pandemic taught us anything, it's that besides the fact that Congress wasn't looking out for us, it's that we're capable of collaborating across the internet. And so the American Union model is crowdsourcing a parallel legislative structure, one that's guided by the principles that are laid out in the Constitution. So what does this mean? What does it mean to have a general strike against Congress? What happens if Congress fails to act? Well, the main point of a general strike in an election cycle is to deny legitimacy to the victors. And you've seen a number of Latin American companies, some Middle Eastern countries, seen other democracies that have tried this model of refusing to participate in elections and boycotting elections. And that tends not to work, because if you boycott an election, then your opposition tends to win. It happens almost in every case. And so what you've done then is you've handed power to the opposition, and you've removed yourself from you've removed your voice from the debate. And the goal is you have to weigh the cost benefit analysis when you talk about boycotting an election, and it generally does not work. So a general strike against Congress is not boycotting the elections. Instead, the way that we deny them legitimacy is by electing them on a random basis, or specifically threatening to elect them on a random basis. So incumbents versus challengers, not based on party affiliation. We can elect them based on a coin flip or the Powerball drawing on the night of Monday, October 31st, to hash out endorsements and deny Congress their legitimacy, so that every member of Congress knows that they are not there by the will of the people, by the support of the people in their district, but they're there on a vote of no confidence, that somebody has to be in charge. And in a two-party system like the one that we have now, we can choose between the party in power and the party trying to get power. We have two choices: the incumbent and their major party challenger. We have two choices, but we can make that choice randomly as a way of conscientiously refusing to play this lesser of two evils game that the two-party system keeps us trapped in. And so what does that look like to that general strike? So as I said, well, let's go back a little bit more. So how do we get to that point? How do we avoid the general strike at the ballot box in November? And the answer is give Congress a way to succeed, give Congress a set of demands of things that they can do that will earn them our support so we don't have to attack their legitimacy. And that means having a set of very clear demands, not these vague campaign promises of that, again, as I talked about beginning, not the vague campaign promises that you might hear in ads of reform healthcare or things like that, right? But a very specific set of solutions. When we say that the blueprint for better America or a better America will end poverty, end mass incarceration, and end the endless wars, you can read exactly how we do that. When it comes to ending poverty, exactly how universal basic income of $1,300 a month for adults and $433 for kids, how that will lift every American family up above the poverty line, how the program is run by the Social Security Administration, how it's funded by the U.S. Treasury. All of these details are spelled out in a legislative package that's ready to go to the president's desk if Congress approves it. When we say end mass incarceration, well, you can read the dozens of reforms to the criminal justice system that are included in this legislative package. And again, when it says end the endless wars, you can read all the policies that will stop, will reduce our global military footprint and restore our moral standing in the world. So this is not a vague, nebulous set of demands for Congress. When we say end poverty, end mass incarceration, and end the endless wars, or face a general strike, there is a very clear way for them to meet these terms by putting this legislative package on the president's desk. So how do we build the public pressure in Congress for them to act before the election? And there's a couple of ways. First is to demonstrate our strength by rejecting this false dichotomy in the polls. So when the pollsters, they call us up and they're like, hey, are you going to vote for the Republican or the Democrat in the general election? Members of the American Union have to say, no, we refuse this false dichotomy that you keep giving us. Instead, we're developing our own metric. We're going to vote with the American Union endorsement. There'll be either a Republican or a Democrat in all 470 of the congressional races based on how Congress responds to this demand. And this is important because a lot of times when you see groups that that are nonpartisan, that offer endorsements, they tend to heavily favor one party over the other. And the goal here is not to acknowledge the existence of parties at all, right? The framers didn't want America to have political parties. They tried to steer us away from them. And so the blueprint is a sincere offer to Republicans and Democrats, all the incumbents. Look, get this done before the election and you can earn the American Union endorsement. These are our terms. Put the blueprint on the president's desk, end poverty, end mass incarceration, end the endless wars, get it done and get the endorsement. It doesn't matter whether you're a Republican or a Democrat. What matters is if you are an incumbent or a challenger. So if the incumbents refuse to act in 10 days, then their challengers can earn the American Union endorsement. So how exactly does that work? How does this endorsement process work? Well, this comes back to the general strike on October 15th, where the American people can demand that Congress act, that Congress put the legislative package on the president's desk within 10 days. And the way that we demand this is across social media using the hashtags Fast for Peace or the hashtags VoteAU for the American Union. And so as people use these hashtags and signify, one, they are making this demand of Congress, act now, and two, that they are willing to commit voting together as a bloc in November. And so this is where challengers have their opportunity. If you are a challenger running for Congress, then the American Union will be watching to see what you do on October 15th. And if you take up these demands to end poverty, end mass incarceration, and end the endless wars by demanding Congress put the blueprint on the president's desk within 10 days. So for all the challengers for Congress, we'll be watching your Twitter account to see if you use the hashtag Fast for Peace or Vote AU on October 15th in order to pledge your vote to seeing these demands enacted. Now, think about what this means for you as a candidate, as a challenger. By pledging to support the American Union endorsement, you as a challenger run the risk that the incumbent will, in fact, meet your terms, will actually meet your demand, in which case challengers are expected to support the endorsement and endorse the incumbent who has done what they've demanded, who has, in fact, put the blueprint on the president's desk within 10 days. So what kind of message does that send to the voters? It sends to the voters the message that I care more about getting things done. I care more about solving problems for America. I care more about moving America forward than I do about my own personal political career. Now, that's a good message for a lot of voters. That's a good message that demonstrates a challenger's integrity, their commitment to seeing problems solved instead of just looking out for themselves. And so challengers are going to have to make this political calculation on October 15th. Do they take up these demands? Do they demand that Congress enact the blueprint and promise their support for the American Union endorsement in their congressional race? Well, if they do, it certainly makes them look good to the voters, especially because if Congress fails to act, if Congress refuses to pass the blueprint within 10 days, all the challengers who took up our demands will automatically get the American Union endorsement. And so these challengers are doing the political calculation, you've got to think, well, I'm in a close race trying to knock off this incumbent. And if there's a block of principled voters that are willing to vote for either me or my opponent, I want that block of votes, especially if it'll put me over the top. And so this is an aspect of gamification to this model, where if you're the challenger, you want to win this decisive block of votes from the American Union to put yourself over the top. However, you've got to risk that you will lose the race because the incumbent actually did what you asked them to. And so this aspect of gamification, is what makes this model different than any other political model out there. Incumbents and challengers both are expected, if they are capable, to join in the Fast for Peace on October 15th, to go as a fasting, as I've said before, fasting and compromise are two sides of the same coin. They're willingly giving something up. And this legislative package, the willingness to look beyond party affiliation and instead focus on solution, all these things require compromise. And so the fast is a way of demonstrating our sincere intention, our ability to compromise, our willingness to compromise, as well as demonstrating a shared self-sacrifice for this larger purpose. This is what gives us the moral high ground. And on October 2nd, on Sunday, I'll be talking more about the underpinnings of nonviolence underneath the American Union. But today we're focusing on the general strike and how exactly that works. where I was going with that, though, is that as part of my own personal commitment to seeing America end poverty, end mass incarceration, and end the endless wars, I started my fast last Saturday. So today is day 5 without food. And I will not eat until October 15th, until everyone in America has had the opportunity to weigh in and decide for themselves. And so my weight's down to 192 pounds today. Still feeling good, and hoping to persuade lots of people to join the general strike against Congress on October 15th. Now, how does the members of Congress, the candidates for Congress, how do they make this political calculation about whether or not endorsing and demanding the blueprint's immediate passage, if whether or not that's good for them? And so this is where the American Union needs to show up in the polls, so that when the pollsters report the results, they say, all right, well, 2%, 3%, 4% of Americans have committed to voting for the American Union endorsement. Now, this 3.5%, which is our goal, is the amount of the percentage of the population that's needed for nonviolent movements to succeed in producing political change. But as a practical matter, that's 3.5% of the vote nationwide is enough to control the balance of power in Congress. And so this general strike against Congress also points towards the Republicans and the Democrats. It's primarily about individual candidates for Congress. It also goes to the overall power structure in Congress and which party will be in charge in the 118th Congress, which is why it's very important to break the polls, both internet polls and telephone polls as well. Last but not least, the general strike against Congress includes boycotting the economy on Saturday, October 15th. Let's go ahead and as a way to demonstrate and to show support for this set of demands, as a way to send a strong message to Congress to remind them that we, the people, have the power. Boycott the economy on Saturday, October 15th. Unless you're an essential worker, try and take the day off of work and don't spend any money in the economy. You want to shut down the economy for one day, not to wreck the economy, but as a show of strength. All right, let's see. So general strike. Talked about the general strike and how it will delegitimize the winners of Congress. That it is small numbers of people that decide the outcome of a lot of these close races, and we have a lot of close races in 2022, where just a small percentage of voters can control the outcome, can flip it from one to the other. That 3.5%, if you go back and look at the results from the 2020 election, there were 8 Senate seats and 59 House seats where a 3.5% block of voters could have flipped it from one party to the other. And in a Congress that right now has a 50-50 Senate division, and I believe a 215 to 211 in the House. It's a very, very close. And as we're seeing the polls for this upcoming election emphasize how close it is. But we need a better model, because what we see now is, as things get close, is more fear mongering, more finger pointing and saying that other party, those other candidates, they are evil. You've got to vote for us because we're the only ones who can protect you. And when the American people vote against something, when they vote for the lesser of two evils, it generally doesn't solve any problems. And so and the people who have the most influence in that system are the people who donate the most money, the people who have all the cash that can fund these billions and billions of dollars in election spending. And so while the Republicans and Democrats spend all that money trying to make the race as close as possible and tip it in their favor, fighting back and forth, what they're really doing is giving more power to a union of swing voters, that can be the deciders. And so it doesn't take billions and billions of dollars. What it takes is a committed group of people willing to vote together to make certain specific legislative demands. You know, the goal of the Constitution was the goal of promoting the general welfare is about everyone's health, happiness, and prosperity, promoting those things. And you know, if we want to see every American succeed, and that's the point of an American union of swing voters, is to win us a better social contract. If we want to see every American succeed, we have to offer a path for success to the 535 members of Congress, give them an opportunity to succeed as well. Too much of our politics is about, you know, destroying the other side, beating the other side. And the American Union as a moral crusade is about trying to help them succeed in getting back to our constitutional duties, putting the blueprint for a better America on the president's desk to end poverty, end mass incarceration, and end the endless wars. That is a much better model for collaborative democracy instead of the adversarial democracy that we have now. That is just tearing our country apart. So, all right, seeing no questions in the chat, I think that covers pretty much how the general strike would work. If Congress refuses to meet our terms and they run the risk of being elected at random in a way that denies them legitimacy, if they, the other options. So, members of the American Union, you can join on the website anamericanunion.com. It's $5 a month and a good faith pledge to vote for the Republican or Democrat who makes the American Union endorsement, who receives the American Union endorsement. I lost my train of thought there. Yes, so on October 15th is the general strike, is the invitation for Americans to participate in a national fast for peace to de-escalate the 2022 elections, not by clicking a like or a retweet, but by doing something personally in their own life, by giving up food for a 24-hour period. Gandhi, when he used this strategy as part of his nonviolent war of independence in India, Gandhi recommended a dinner-to-dinner fast. So eat dinner, skip breakfast and lunch, and after 24 hours have passed, you can eat dinner again. Just drink water for those 24 hours. And as millions and millions of Americans know, fasting isn't necessarily hard, but it takes an intention to willfully abstain from food. And it's that shared intention, that shared self-sacrifice, that gives us the moral high ground to demand that Congress act, gives us the moral authority to demand ending poverty, ending mass incarceration, and ending the endless wars. And so members of the American Union who participate in the Fast for Peace on October 15th, on October 16th, will get a ballot and get a chance to vote on how the American Union endorsements should be distributed if the incumbent does not cooperate in putting the blueprint for a better America on the president's desk within 10 days, or the challenger does not compete for the American Union endorsement by using the hashtag Fast for Peace or hashtag Vote AU on October 15th. So those are the two conditions that every incumbent or challenger can do to compete for the American Union endorsement. However, if the incumbent is fails to act or the challenger doesn't want to compete, what do you do? How do we solve this? Again, the general strike isn't about boycotting the election, because boycotting elections doesn't work. The general strike is about using our power as deciders. And so members on October 16th will be given a couple of different options. The first is to give incumbents a second bite at the apple. If the incumbent participated in the fast, pledged to support the American Union endorsement, but wasn't able to pass the blueprint, we could go ahead and endorse them anyway and help keep them in Congress, where in 2024, they'd be in a better position to help enact the blueprint for a better America, whatever sort of legislative package the American Union comes up with in future elections. So we could give the incumbents a second bite of the apple. If they failed to act, but they demonstrated an intention, then you could endorse them. The second option would be to endorse all remaining challengers, that Republican or Democrat. If Congress fails to act, we kick out as many members as possible. Kick out Republicans, kick out Democrats, and instead replace them with their challengers. Now, as a practical matter, if you kick out equal numbers of Republicans and Democrats, it doesn't really change the balance of power in Washington, D.C. All it does is just generate a lot of turnover, but it would send a powerful message that the American Union is not about partisanship, but instead we are focused on policy. And if Congress refuses to meet our terms, there will be consequences. And so kicking out as many members as possible would probably be a lot of members of the public who would appreciate seeing that happen as well. Congress has their approval rating that hovers around 20%. Congress is not popular. And so we could instead make a national push to kick out as many incumbents as possible and see how popular that is. I think there'd be a lot of takers for that. Now, it's important to recognize that in all of these scenarios, a lot of people are going to be voting for two members of Congress, both a congressman and a U.S. senator in 34 states. And so there may be a conflict. You may be asked, you may endorse a Republican in the congressional race and a Democrat in the Senate race, or vice versa. And so a true union of swing voters has to be willing to vote for either the Republican or the Democrat based on our own standards, our own national metric, our own set of standards, essentially holding our own election to be the deciders in 2022. But what happens if the members vote down those two options? They don't want to give incumbents a second chance, and they don't want to just reward all the challengers. It's worth emphasizing that on October 16th, we will have had this roll call vote of where all the members of Congress and their challengers, they will have made a public statement on Twitter, or they will have refused. Either way, they will have tweeted their support through the hashtag Fast for Peace or hashtag VoteAU. And so we will know. And so the members may feel like, look, challengers weren't that helpful. Why should we reward all the challengers when we're not willing to take up our demands? And so the last option is then to elect members of Congress and endorse them at random, as well as decide the balance of power in Washington on the basis of a coin flip. This is the ultimate in denying legitimacy to an elected official, to know that they won only by random chance, that it wasn't about them. It was that they are there because people are frustrated, and somebody has to win. we can't, somebody has to win, right? Even if every single person in America boycotted all the elections, and so all the candidates for Congress got 0 votes, states still have tie-breaking procedures, usually things like flipping a coin or drawing a card or whatever, right? There is no way that we can boycott the elections into Congress ceasing to exist. So let's acknowledge that somebody's going to get elected. It's going to be a Republican or a Democrat because we have a two-party system, and focus on being the deciders. That's where the national bloc of swing voters comes in, because it just takes that 3.5% to control the balance of power in Washington, D.C., and decide dozens and dozens of close elections all across this country. All right. So I think that pretty much explains how the general strike will work. On October 15th, last Saturday, on September 24th, we published the Blueprint for a Better America. You can read it on the website so everyone knows exactly what these legislative demands are, that everyone in America has 3 weeks to look it over, to read it, to decide whether or not they want to end poverty, end mass incarceration, and end the endless wars. And if so, if they are willing to pool their votes in order to accomplish that. On Saturday, October 15th, is the general strike against Congress, a demand that they meet our terms by putting the Blueprint for a Better America on the president's desk within 10 days. And if they refuse to act, if they do, then great, all of them, everybody wins. We don't have to have a hateful, polarizing election. We can reelect them, and everybody comes out ahead. America comes out ahead. America rises up from the pandemic as a nation that has dealt with poverty, is readdressing the moral harm, the moral injustice of mass incarceration, and America that ends the endless wars and rethinks our foreign policy that causes so much unnecessary suffering around the planet. We can all win. America can come out ahead if we can persuade Congress to act with the general strike on October 15th. However, if they refuse, the general strike means offering their challengers, Republican or Democrat, the opportunity to win the American Union endorsement, and ultimately threatening to elect members of Congress at random if as a way to delegitimize their office. I first got elected in 2006, and I worked hard, knocked on a lot of doors in my state house district, talked to lots of people, put out lots of signs, and I worked hard and I won, but I had a D next to my name. And, so there was a big blue wave in 2006. And I'd paddled my surfboard out there and positioned myself to take advantage of that wave. Not all Democrats won. I did. But there was always that question of whether or not, what would have happened without that wave, right? Was I there because of the wave or because of my hard work? And so that first term in office, there was always that kind of question. But in 2008, the voters of my district reelected me and sent me back to serve in the state legislature. And so that answered the question. I wasn't there on a vote of no confidence. I was there because the people wanted me there. And so we can do the same thing to Congress. We can make them question their legitimacy if they want to keep poverty, if they are satisfied keeping 37 million Americans living below the poverty line. If they're satisfied that 12 million children are going to bed in poverty tonight in the richest country in the world. If they are okay with the fact that tomorrow 2 million Americans will wake up behind bars, including hundreds of thousands who haven't been convicted of any crime that just can't pay their bail. If we're satisfied with an America that has a military budget, a defense budget that spends more than the next, I lost track, nine largest countries combined, military industrial complex that is the world's largest single producer of greenhouse gases. a military industrial complex that is costing us nearly $1 trillion a year and harming our moral standing in the world. If they're okay with all of these things, then they can turn this down. They can take the chance at getting elected randomly as a result of the general strike. But there's a better way forward. The better way is for Americans to cooperate and come together around solutions, around a specific set of demands to end poverty, end mass incarceration, and end the endless wars, and not take any excuses from Congress. Congress loves to make excuses. Again, like I talked about earlier with the bicameral legislature, where you can always blame the other chamber, like, oh, it's not my fault. No, it is your fault. Congress is the legislative branch of the most powerful country in the world. They can do pretty much anything that they want. They can override a president's veto. If a Supreme Court strikes down a law, they can pass a different version. There's some occasions where unconstitutional things would not be permitted, but the judicial branch can't stop them from passing a law. They can only stop the law from remaining on the books. The legislative branch has the power, and they can put up these artificial barriers like the filibuster, things like that. But the general rule is a majority rule, that the majority of members of Congress have the ability, they have the authority, they have the responsibility, they have the duty to act, to advance these constitutional goals, to advance the principles laid out in America's mission statement, in the preamble to the Constitution. And they'll make excuses like, oh, well, we're not in session, we're on vacation right now, or, oh, it's the other chamber's fault, the Senate wouldn't do this. No. This is a model of refusing to accept any excuses from Congress, to not let them weasel their way out of their responsibilities to the American people. It's a way to threaten to hold them accountable, all 535 members of Congress, through the general strike on October 15th. Some people are asking, well, what about the 65 members of the Senate who are not on the ballot, whose seats aren't up for election? And that is a legitimate question. And so obviously this was done, the framers did this intentionally. 2-year terms for the House and 6-year terms for the Senate, purposely staggering them so that the Senate those longer terms would make them, I guess I'll say, less vulnerable to the whims of the people. So the answer then comes from, again, establishing the American Union as a committed block of swing voters who are committed to being the deciders in elections. And so should sitting members of the Senate who are not on the ballot turn this down, the next obvious thing to use against them is in their next election or in their primary, finding a candidate of their own party who wants to end poverty, end mass incarceration, and end the endless wars, and will know that they can count on a block of committed voters and supporters to do those things. And so that's part of the leverage that we have over the Senate. Should those 2/3 of the members who aren't on the ballot not be as concerned about what a union of voters can do. The other part of this is that they are in fact holding back their own political party, right? The way that all the incumbents, Republican or Democrat, can get the endorsement from the American Union is by putting the blueprint for a better America on the president's desk. And so if you've got hundreds of members in the House and dozens of members in the Senate who are all looking for this opportunity to get reelected, to get this block of votes to advance the blueprint for a better America, and their fellow senators like, nah, we're going to stop you, then what those senators are doing is committing to giving the challengers a chance to knock off as many incumbents as possible. And so, depending on how things break out on October 15th, this calculation will have to be part of the calculation for the members of the Senate. What does this do for my political party if I insist on keeping poverty, keeping mass incarceration, keeping the endless wars? So between those multiple threats, multiple ways to hold them accountable, and just as importantly, by changing the national conversation, by having pundits across the country asking this very simple question of all the members, all the candidates for Congress: do you support the blueprint for a better America? Do you want to end poverty, end mass incarceration, and end the endless wars? And if not, then everyone needs to explain why they would want to keep these things. And so in these last critical weeks before the election, we can focus the spotlight on Congress. We can shine a light on their legislative process and say, look, we don't want any excuses. You can very simply put the text of the blueprint before the House and the Senate by replacing the text of a bill in a committee of conference. You have the ability, leadership in Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer, you have the ability to give members of Congress this choice. And if they refuse, as the majority party, they are the ones most likely to bear the brunt of throwing out incumbents. So no excuses. We know they have the ability to act. The only thing that's lacking is their desire, is their willingness to act. And so we don't have to let them get away with it. Again, a small percentage of voters, 3.5%, we can paint them into a corner where maybe they don't care about ending poverty and ending mass incarceration and ending the endless wars, but they care about looking good. They care about winning their elections. They care about retaining power. And great. If we want to, we can help them succeed at that if, and only if, they put the blueprint for a better America on the president's desk within 10 days of the general strike. You can learn more about the legislative package, about the 50 plus policies that are in it across the 104 sections and 200 and some pages of legislation. You can read it on our website, anamericanunion.com. You can join the American Union for $5 a month and add your pledge, your commitment to support the American Union endorsement in November and participate in the general strike on October 15th. Yeah, we the people have the power. We've always, there have been efforts in days gone by for the people to exert their influence over the legislative and the electoral process in a way where the people had the power instead of moneyed interests. One of the best examples comes from the way that the prohibition movement 100 years ago, and the way that they pressured candidates to support alcohol prohibition, whether they were Republicans or Democrats. And so for candidates for Congress who wanted to win, endorsing the goals of alcohol prohibition was a way to earn that block of swing voters who cared very strongly about that one issue. They saw it as a moral crusade that trumped partisan politics. And so in 1916, in the election, they elected a Congress that quickly was able to pass the 18th Amendment, to prohibit alcohol in America, and push that constitutional amendment out to the states. And so this demonstrates that a union of voters committed to a very specific legislative demand or demands has the ability to break through partisan politics and deliver real reforms for the American people. Now, alcohol prohibition was not a good reform, but it demonstrates it's a model of that. It demonstrates how this model can work. And then, of course, it turned around, right? Within 12 years or so, a majority of people were demanding their candidates for Congress support repealing alcohol prohibition. So, all right, it is 8 o'clock. I think we're at a good stopping point for this evening. Thanks for everyone who took the time to watch, and I will see you again tomorrow at 7 p.m. Eastern. Together, we can change the way that America politics works. We can build a better America by unionizing as voters. Learn more on the website, anamericanunion.com.